Hello and welcome to Credit Versio's Q&A Wednesday live for November 24th. I'm your host, David Michalek, and every week at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, we come together here live on Facebook and YouTube to talk about credit. And as a consumer credit expert with nearly a decade of experience, I've done about 10,000 one-on-one credit coaching sessions, and I'm looking forward to helping you understand and improve your credit. Joining us today, again, is America's #1 credit expert. He's got 30 years experience in the credit industry, including some years at FICO and Equifax both, and he's one of the very few credit experts that actually comes from inside the credit industry. Let's welcome John Ulzheimer. I'm going to play his intro video this time, and then we'll get right to it.
John Ulzheimer is America's most recognized credit expert. With 30 years of experience in the credit industry, having worked for both FICO and Equifax, he's the go-to authority for answers to credit questions. Here to answer your credit questions, Credit Versio presents John Ulzheimer.
John, welcome.
Thanks for having me. Thank you for color coordinating. It's very important that we
I know. This is the first time, I think, that I've worn something other than my tried and true blue Credit Versio shirt, my little logo here. Today I'm like, it's the day before Thanksgiving. I look out into the parking lot. It's empty. There's my car and the car of my team here. So I'm like, we're gonna go holiday mode today.
Yeah. Well done. I'm going
All
pumpkin
right.
mode.
Yeah. Let me see if I can bump up your volume just a little bit. No, I think you're good. Okay. All right. Well, welcome everybody. And you know, the way I wanted to start, John, I know we covered this subject before, but I got a little bit of a backstory. I was having a conversation with a lady, text conversation with a lady a couple of days ago. And one of the things that she said in her text is like, hey, I just got an update on my credit report. My scores have gone down about 80 points across the board. What's going on? And when I looked at her credit report, the first thing that I noticed is the previous month she had 2 cards with balances. And her utilization rate was probably maybe 20-30% on those cards. And this month, her credit report just came in a couple of days ago. She's got about 8 to 9 cards with balances, and her utilization rate went to, I think it was 78%. So big drop in score. And I know this time of the year, I mean, we got Black Friday coming up, day after tomorrow. This is the time of year where people spend a lot of money. Those credit cards get hot. And I thought maybe you might want to talk about some good credit habits during this time of year. In addition to that, what maybe we can expect just realistically if we start using plastic pretty heavy as far as what it does to scores.
That's right. And you're right. Black Friday is tomorrow, just so we identify that we are in fact doing, or excuse me, a Friday, 2 days from now.
Day after tomorrow,
we are in fact doing this evening before Thanksgiving. And then of course you have Cyber Monday and whatever other date Hallmark has made up. So we go out and buy more stuff.
For sure.
That's right. So what generally happens every year, if you look at kind of the trajectory of people's spending over the period of the year, it tends to increase the last 5 weeks of the year. And for those of you who don't know why it's called Black Friday, I would suggest that you look it up. It's supposedly the date that retailers go in the black because of the amount of money that gets spent over the last 5 weeks of the year. So in other words, they become profitable. Assuming that they're not profitable the first 48 weeks or so of the year. So the byproduct of the Thanksgiving through Christmas-ish end of the year season is that people tend to spend more money because they're buying gifts, they're traveling, so they're putting a lot of charges on credit cards, and that's fine, right? I mean, that's what the holidays are about to some extent, is traveling around and buying things for people and whatnot. But the problem is that what's the tip of the sword? Meaning, what does that do to your credit report? Because it always comes back to what does that activity mean as far as the change of the information on a credit report? And so you just identified a couple of things with respect to your conversation, your text conversation that you had, which is that balances went up which means that the utilization, the aggregate utilization ratio also went up, and it sounds like it spiked pretty significantly. Number two is that the consumer now has considerably more accounts with balances than they had before, where they had fewer accounts with balances. That's problem number two. And problem number three is that the utilization for those previously unused cards went from zero to some value greater than zero.
Mm-hmm.
So really, it's kind of the trifecta of bad things that can happen with respect to debt. So it should not be a surprise that the scores went down and went down considerably. I just hope that the consumer is not up closing on a mortgage loan over in the next month or two, or they're going to have a problem. So what's the solution, right? What the solution to the problem is you obviously can pay off your credit card balances in full whenever you'd like to. You don't have to wait for your statement to show up.
In fact, we got a pretty expert answer right here from Cecil. I buy them, pay it off before the end of the billing cycle.
Yeah, so that's what I call the ethical credit score hack. Is you're still able to use your credit cards. You're still benefiting from the fraud protections of plastic, and you're also able to use the portable capacity, meaning you're not carrying around cash or a checkbook, and you still get the rewards that you earn by using the cards that you use. But by paying it off before the statement closing date, or the billing cycle, as Cecil calls it, is the balance that shows up on your credit report is not the same balance that you incurred over the period of the prior 30 days. So it's actually a really good that you forego the grace period by doing that, but to the extent you were going to pay it in full anyways, maybe you don't need that 21-day grace period. So that's really that, if you kind of had to look at it from the perfect way of doing it, is Cecil's way. If you had to look at it from the least optimal way of doing it, it's the way that your particular client was doing it. But that's okay. Look, you can't go into credit card paralysis just because you're worried about your credit score constantly changing, right? So you just pay it in full or pay it off as much as you can the next time you get bills, and then just recognize that the next time you're about to go out and buy a bunch of things and go hog wild with your cards, that this is the type of thing that can happen, and don't do it just before you're out applying for a car loan or a mortgage or something that requires you to have the highest credit score possible. And then you're solving the short-term problem, and you're actually kind of learning from it, right? This is a good experience for her. Hopefully it was done kind of in a controlled environment where there isn't something pending that's going to be like a mortgage pending right now would be the worst thing possible for her. But hopefully she's in a controlled environment where there isn't anything pending. And this will just be really just kind of a learning lesson for her. And hopefully the next time she does it. One of the things that I do want to point out, and if you have a Visa or a MasterCard or an Amex or a Discover, I promise you all the things that you buy this holiday season, you can buy them with those 4 cards. You don't have to spread balances across a ton of retail store credit cards just because you're at that particular store. And this is the time of the year that you can end up seeing what I call nuisance balances. You can end up seeing all these nuisance balances all over your credit report because people feel like they have to use their Gap card at the Gap, and they have to use their Macy's card at Macy's, and they have to use their whatever card at whatever. So I promise you they'll take your Amex. I promise you they'll take your Visa. And so that way you're still going to have the same aggregate utilization, but you're also going to have fewer accounts with balances. And you're also going to have lower line item utilization because those cards still have 0 balances on them. So to the extent that you're okay doing that, and you have the capacity on those cards to do that, you're going to limit the credit score downside while still having the same amount of debt. You're just localizing it to fewer credit cards rather than spreading it out across more credit cards.
Yeah, too. One of the strategies that I use in here, in fact, one of my guys in the office here is really, really good at this, is figuring out this time of year what kind of cards are giving what kind of cash back. Now, let me qualify that a little bit, because sometimes people do some ill-advised things trying to chase credit card points and miles. But if you're a transactor, and to quickly explain that for you watching it, there's the transactor and revolver. Really want to be a transactor where you're buying things on your credit card for all the reasons that John gave, and then you're paying it off. Before that 21, it's a 21-day grace period. I imagine.
You're paying it off before you even get the statement. So, like in
Yeah.
Cecil's example, he pays it off before he even gets a statement, which means he gets a
Yeah.
statement, but it's got a zero balance on it. So
Yeah.
there is no need for a 21-day grace period because there's no payment to make. So you're
Yeah.
actually paying it off. There's two relevant dates on your credit card account once you've opened the card. Number one is the due date. Obviously,
Mm-hmm.
that's the end of the 21-day grace period. That's when you have to have some minimum payment submitted to the card issuer in order for your account to remain current and for you to avoid any sort of late fee and whatever nasty things they're going to do to you. That's one of the dates. The other date is called the statement closing date. And the statement closing date is the end of the 30-day billing cycle, meaning that all the transactions that occurred in that 30-day period, which are going to be, it's going to be positive and negative. So it's going to be purchases, charges, fees, interest, minus payments and credits and any cashback rewards that you may apply to the balance. And I don't know if I said returns, but I guess that would be credits. So the net of all that stuff is going to equal your statement balance. And if you can get that to equal zero, and it's really not, I'm making it sound more complicated than it is. Everyone watching, log into your Discover card or log into your Visa account or whatever, and look at what the balance is. And that's going to be your balance as of right now. If it's $5,000, if you pay $5,000 right now and you don't have any other pending purchases or pending charges like auto charges that go to your credit card, whenever your statement cycle ends, your statement's going to be zero, and you're going to get a statement in the mail or whatever that indicates zero payment due because you have a zero balance. And the credit card issuer is going to report that balance to the credit reporting agencies, which means you're going to have a zero balance on your credit reports for at least the next 30 days. And obviously a zero balance is really, really solid for a credit score. So those are the two dates that are really relevant.
Right.
You don't have to always do this. Look, if you're in the middle of what I call kind of credit no man's land, where you're not actively searching for credit and you don't need your score to be 840 for any particular reason, then you don't need to do, I never do that unless I'm about to apply for something. I applied for a car loan in August, and I guarantee you that we may have talked about this in one of the prior Credit Versio webinars, where that particular month I did exactly what Cecil did, which is to make sure I paid all my credit cards off by the before the statement was actually cut, and my score was really, really solid, and I got what I think is a pretty good deal.
Yeah, well, I did the same thing. In fact, it's been almost exactly a year ago. What is it, 6 days from now? Yeah, it'll be a year ago where I got my new car, and had obviously got a car loan, did the exact same thing, just paid everything down as much as I possibly could. I think I had zero balances on pretty much everything except for one card. And I got a great rate. But like I was saying before, one of the things that the benefits of, I use pretty much just two cards. I alternate, but mostly it's my Cap One card because it usually has 2% on everything that I buy, and occasionally Discover gets really competitive with 5%. But other than that, I don't use store cards. I don't use anything else because I know I'm going to pay it off anyway. So I might as well pay it off and get the points on top of that.
Yeah, I do the same thing. Not to look. There's no, just because I do it some way doesn't mean it's the right way. I mean, if it works for you, it works for you. I use an Amex card because I get great rewards. And I have a Fidelity, it's an investment Fidelity where I can actually earn points, and I can donate those points to my Fidelity account, and actually goes into a retirement account. So it's actually, it's actually an investment of my rewards points. So, and those are really the only two cards that I use, unless for some reason, I have to use something other than, I've got 13 credit cards. So people think I'm crazy because I have 13 credit cards, but I have a ton of available credit on my credit report, which means I can make a lot of significant purchases on my cards in any particular month, and my ratios are never going to go up above about 5%. And there's some months where I'm paying private school tuition, property taxes, and so it's a ton. And sometimes my Amex bill is absurdly high because, I have to buy a refrigerator or something. So, so even I call it utilization insurance. I'm
Hmm.
completely
Yeah.
immune to spikes in my utilization because of the amount of credit limits that I've got on my credit report. And you don't get that stuff with a bunch of Macy's credit cards or Home Depot credit
Exactly.
cards. That's the kind of thing that you have to really earn over time, and you have to use those credit cards periodically to make sure that the issuers don't close them from out from underneath you or lower your limits because of extended periods of inactivity. So these
What
are
would you
just
say
kind of
is?
strategies to deal with that utilization ratio over time.
Yeah, I've been asked this question many times as far as how long is the longest I want to go without any activity on a credit card. I've always said maybe 6 months, maybe no more than 12. What's your take on that?
Yeah, that's kind of what I do. And it kind of happens organically for me, is that I will whip out almost every single one of my cards at least once every 6 months, just to kind of restart the clock of activity, just to throw a little business in the direction of the card issuer. I mean, they don't make any money off interest because I pay it in full almost immediately, but they get the swipe fee or the interchange from the merchant. And
Yeah.
so they do make a little bit of money. So I'm above the $0 profit line, if you will, not by
Mm.
much, but it's enough to where I think I'm in the safe zone. And look, to the extent someone closes an account of mine, then I'll replace it with something else.
Yeah. All right. Couple of questions or a couple of comments here. Manswell, welcome back. Let's see.
Dude, where's he been?
He says sorry for being absent from class lately. Good vibes. Okay.
You had to serve your 30 days, huh? So they finally let you out.
All right, let's see. Ariane with a great question. Now we're going off the reservation a little bit, but that's perfectly fine. This is a great question. Can you please explain what metrics are used to assign a report to a scorecard?
Yeah, okay, so let me explain what a scorecard is first,
Yeah.
because I don't know that we've ever actually talked about this. So whenever people talk about credit scoring models, they neglect to explain that a credit scoring model is really a collection of models kind of wrapped in a single box. Um, so it's almost like a radio. Remember the old-fashioned radio? I guess people still have radios where you have a radio, and so you're listening to the radio, right?
Hmm.
But there's like 1,000 stations. So you're really listening to some specific station on a particular radio. So a credit scoring system is a little bit like that, where you have a credit scoring model like FICO 9 at Experian or FICO 8 at Equifax. That is a model. But inside that box, there are many, many, many other models that are what are called homogeneous scoring environments. And that's what is commonly referred to as a scorecard. And so the scorecard is not unlike kind of like the bowling. If you think of going bowling and you get a strike and a spare and a strike and a spare, and at the end of your
Yeah.
frames, they add it up and that's your final score. That's kind of what a scorecard is as far as
Hmm.
credit scoring systems go. And so a scorecard is a collection of characteristics, variables, and weights. In English, it's a collection of questions, answers, and points. So it's a collection of questions that are asked of a credit report based on the answers that are given to the questions from the credit report, like how many inquiries in the past 12 months, what's your revolving utilization, how long has it been since something happened.
Yeah.
So based on how your credit report answers those questions, the scorecard is going to assign points, and that's called weight. Those are called weights. And so once the scorecard does all of that, it's going to tally up all the weights, and boom, there you go, 300 to 850. So your score is going to fall somewhere within that published range. There are, for any particular credit scoring system, in the neighborhood of 12 to 15 of those scorecards, and they're not. In other words, that if I went and applied for credit and the lender just happened to use the same exact scoring model from the same credit bureau, there's no guarantee that we would be scored using the same scorecard as some other consumer who goes and applies at the same bank for the same
Yeah.
loan at the same time, and they pull the same company's credit report and the same type of credit score. I'll give you some really high-level examples, and this kind of allows me to not violate any sort of confidentiality agreement with any particular company, if you get my point. But
Hmm.
it's pretty commonly known that there's a scorecard built for consumers who have bankruptcies on their
Yeah.
credit reports. There is a scorecard built for consumers who have other derogatory but not bankrupt information on their credit reports. There are several scorecards that are built for consumers who have no derogatory information on their credit reports. Those are called clean file scorecards. There's the derog scorecards and the clean file scorecards. Then you have what are referred to as the thin file scorecards. And so these would be scorecards for consumers who have, 2 trade lines, 3 trade lines, for example. And so the reason credit scores are built like this, the reason there's this architecture of credit scores like this is because the same set of rules don't necessarily apply to every consumer. A consumer who has 1 trade line on their credit report cannot be empirically evaluated the same way that someone who has a 40-year-old credit report with 20 pages of information that filed bankruptcy 2 months ago. You can't evaluate those 2 particular credit report profiles using the same set of rules, which is why you have all these different scoring environments within any particular scoring system. And so the answer to the question, what metrics are used to assign the scorecard, that's actually something that's done by the credit scoring system before the score is even calculated. And so, I always try to bring things back to basketball to some extent. So think of within all credit scoring systems is a little itty bitty contraption called a splitter. And the splitter is like the point guard of a basketball team. So the point guard is the person who he or she brings the ball up court, and he or she distributes the basketball to the different players, and he or she, calls the plays, play number 2, play number 3, blah, 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 whatever. So the point guard is kind of like the on-field general, if you will, of the basketball team. And so within a scoring system, this little thing called the splitter acts as the point guard for your credit report. And so the first thing that the splitter does when it sees the information on your credit report is it determines, okay, based on the information on this credit report, what particular scorecard am I going to be dishing the rock to today? And so if the credit report has a bankruptcy, it's going to assign it to the bankruptcy scorecards. If the credit report is clean but only has 3 trade lines, it's going to assign it to one of the thin file, clean file, thin file scorecards. And so that is how kind of mechanically how a credit report goes from being a credit report without a score into the credit scoring system, assigned to a scorecard by the splitter. And then obviously once the scorecard is assigned, then the credit report data is filtered through the scoring model. The score is calculated, the score factors are determined, all that stuff is appended to the credit report, and then boom, that stuff is off to the lender so that they can make the decision. All this stuff happens basically almost instantaneously in less than a second. And so that's kind of at a high level how that is done.
That's a fast. I remember when you explained that to me for the first time, I don't know, 5-6 years ago at a summit seminar, and I remember thinking, how many people just don't know what goes into factoring a score. I mean, first of all, people generally don't really have a lot of information on how that's done to begin with. But then when you dive into it to see how much consideration is put in and thought is put into creating a credit score that provides some kind of accurate expression of risk for everybody who is looking to get a car loan or a home loan or whatever the purpose is for the credit score. But it's absolutely fascinating.
That's what always cracks me up when people are like, I think we've been able to reverse engineer the score. I'm like, really? Which one? Which scoring environment within the model? It just, I don't know. It just cracks me up when people think that they've broken the code, and they believe that because if you think about it, let's go back to the example you gave at the beginning of the webinar, Dave, and the woman with the utilization spike and the score went down. Her experience was unique to the scorecard that she was assigned.
Yeah. Well, and she also had a bankruptcy too in the past.
So if the bankruptcy was still on her credit report, then the utilization was calculated in the bankruptcy scorecard. So let's just say hypothetically that this same consumer did not have a bankruptcy on the credit report, and she was evaluated using a non-bankruptcy scorecard. Her score experience would not have been the same as it was because utilization may have been classed differently, meaning 0 to 10, 10 to 20. Yeah. So it may have been different ranges. The weighting of utilization may have been different. It may have been less restrictive than it would have been under the bankruptcy scorecard environment. Yeah. So that's why you can't simply say, utilization is always best if you keep it below 27%. Well, that may be accurate for one credit score, one scorecard within that credit score at one bureau at one point in time. But you can't make that point that you can't say that it's universally always going to be, which is why, unless you use the phrase "it depends on" to preface any explanation like that, then really
always have to,
you're kind of guessing to some extent.
Yeah.
Now you can use generalities. I mean,
Yeah.
Vantage Score has published that for their scoring systems, the optimal utilization is below 30%. FICO has published repeatedly studies that kind of profile the high scoring consumers, what they call the high flyers or the high achievers. And the average utilization for those consumers is 7%, which is considerably lower than 30%, right? So, 30%, if you're at 30%, you may be doing fine in one scoring brand's platform, but you're not doing optimal in the other scoring platforms, scoring systems. And so that's why whenever you read anything that I've ever written, it's always try to have as the lowest utilization possible and optimally see if you can get it below 10%, because then you're golden in both FICO and Vantage Scores scoring systems. And that's really about 100% of the scoring market. Rather than trying to do really well in one platform and really ignoring the fact that there is another scoring platform that's commonly used.
Exactly. Cecil's got a question. It gets weird when I use my Amex charge card. It doesn't let me know what my threshold is. So how does this affect credit utilization? Amex charge card versus Amex credit card?
Yeah, so again, it depends. In some of the older scoring systems, charge cards are considered in utilization. In the more contemporary credit scoring system, charge cards are not considered in utilization. So it just depends on which generation of the score is being used as to whether or not your Amex charge card is being considered in utilization or not.
For charge cards, specifically Amex, with some of them don't have any limit. If it is being factored in utilization, what do they use for that? Do they use the highest previous credit limit?
In order for a credit card or charge card in some of the older models to be considered in utilization, and this holds true also for retail store credit cards and then petroleum cards as well. So basically anything that's plastic that has revolving terms, or the old versions vis-a-vis charge cards. So in order for it to be calculated in utilization, it has to have a credit. There's a value, or there's a field in Metro 2 in the credit reporting language for the credit limit. And if for some reason the issuer does not publish a credit limit, or if your card doesn't actually have a credit limit, which by the way, I promise you it does. It may not be published, but I promise you can't just go out and buy a house with your credit card, right? I mean, it's got what's called a shadow limit. So there's actually a limit. It just may not be. No one's telling anybody what it actually is. So it's got to have a value in the credit limit field, or if that field is empty, then it's got to have a value in the highest balance ever, or it's called either the highest historical balance, or the it's basically the highest balance ever on that card. And so if that particular value is there, but your credit limit is not there, then the scoring system is going to default to the highest balance ever value. And so that highest balance ever, could be lower than what your actual credit limit is. And in that scenario, the utilization of that card is going to be higher, because it's a numerator and denominator that aren't necessarily in optimal flux. So I've heard people say, well, I'm going to go max out my charge card just so I avoid them. That seems like a silly thing to do. Buy a whole lot of something just to. There seems like there's other cheaper ways of dealing with that issue than maxing out a credit card just to kind of balloon up that highest balance ever value. But yeah, that's the way it is. That it's got to have one of those two. And if it doesn't have either, if it doesn't have a highest balance ever reported, or it doesn't have a credit limit, then that particular account is bypassed for utilization. It's not considered.
Gotcha. Okay. Maxwell, we did talk about this a little bit, but maybe we can summarize it again for you. What is the difference between due date, statement date, and closing dates? And obviously making the assumption that we're talking about revolving credit here.
Sure. Because it makes sense since we were just talking about that. So Emanuel, here's what I want you to do. You're welcome, Cecil. Here's what I want you to do, Emanuel. I'd like for you to look at your last statement for any of your credit cards. It doesn't matter. And what you're gonna see is you're gonna see what's some refer to it as the statement cycle period or the billing cycle, or it's basically the beginning of some period of time and the end of some period of time, and that's usually 30 days. And every charge or credit or fee or return that occurred during that 30-day period is netted out and it yields your balance. So let's just say your statement cycle period goes from the first of the month to the end of the month. So everything that occurs in that 30-day period is going to be what determines the balance of your particular card. And that could be balances rolled over from the prior month as well. So the end of that 30-day period is called the statement date or the end of the billing cycle. So that's the answer to one of your questions. At that point in time, there's a 21-day clock that starts ticking. It's called the grace period. And the Card Act of 2009 requires that all consumer credit cards have at least a 21-day grace period. So from the end of your statement billing cycle to the 21-day period, all that 3-week period is known as your grace period. And so you can make a payment at some time during that 21-day grace period, and as long as it's the minimum payment due, then your account is going to be in good standing for the following statement cycle or the following month.
Excellent. All right, very good. Well, we got a pretty good crowd here. So if you've got any questions for John, we're probably going to make this a little bit shorter of a live today. I'm sure everybody wants to get out, and I'll neither confirm or deny this, but I'm sure there's some people out there who need to do some last minute Thanksgiving shopping. So if you're one of those, I certainly understand. Let's take a look here and make sure I didn't miss anything. Monswell says, thank you. All right, very good. Oh, I saw D. I put that up, didn't mention it. No question for today. Just want to say thank you for all you do and wish you happy holidays. Happy holidays to you, D. If you're still here. Thank you very much. Okay, what do we got? We're about 35 minutes into it. Okay, so we're going to do something a little unique. John, that was awesome explanation. We did talk about credit cards a little bit. For anybody who's watching this video after the fact, if you have any questions, you can please post them. Let's see. Manswell, I don't know why they have to make it so confusing. Yeah, a lot of stuff can be a little confusing around this subject matter. I didn't realize, gosh, probably till about maybe 10, 11 years ago, the difference between the due date and the statement date. And, case in point, John, this was 2004. I went in to buy a new car. And at the time, credit was good, so I thought. I owned a couple of houses. I was getting ready to, I think I bought a new car. And the guy comes out, he's like, yeah, we could have got you a better rate, but your credit score was only a 680. I'm like, 680? I'm like, of course, again, not really knowing much about credit. I knew that was kind of on the lower side for what I thought I had. And it wasn't until years later, I'm like, oh, I know why. It's because I was I was always using credit cards for my business. And it was not uncommon for them to be 80, 90% utilized, because I'm like, oh, I'll just pay it off, at the due date or whatever. Gave no thought to it whatsoever. But that was a pretty big impact on my score, going in to buy something, not getting a great rate, because I had no idea that you're supposed to pay this stuff off if you're that type of person who pays things off, and not carries a balance month over month, which I didn't do at that time. But Manswell, I can certainly understand. There's a lot to this stuff that can be a little confusing, which is why I bring John on twice a month to explain this stuff.
If it was simple, you could have my father on. He could explain it. So that's actually another one of the reasons why I do what I do with respect to the kind of the hoarding of credit cards, because even though I have two business cards that I use for business expenses, and I didn't count those in the 13 that I referred to earlier. Those are my consumer credit cards, and my accountant does not like it when I commingle personal expenditures on my business cards, and she does not like it when I put business expenditures on my personal credit cards. Even though sometimes I'm caught between a rock and a hard place, and I don't really have a choice. But I do try to keep them as separated as I possibly can. But I also have chosen to do business with business credit card issuers, even though I have agreed to personally guarantee the debts associated with the cards, they do not report to my personal credit reports as a matter of practice, meaning that even though I'm in good standing, they don't, like if I pulled all three of my credit reports right now, neither of my two business credit cards would be on those personal credit reports. And so even some months, pre-COVID, obviously, when I was traveling all over the place and holding seminars and conferences where I'd have to put a ton of charges on my credit card to hold rooms and prepay for certain things, pay deposits at restaurants and whatnot, pay gigantic bills at restaurants. So there were times where my business credit cards had tens of thousands of dollars of charges, and none of that stuff ever made it to my personal credit reports. There are some business credit card issuers that if you sign a personal guarantee, they will report as a matter of practice to the consumer credit reporting agencies. And so even if you're paying in full every month, and even if those accounts are in good standing, and even though they show up on a credit report as a business credit card, they still are being counted in those utilization metrics. And so I try really, really hard to choose those accounts based on what I know about them and how they do, in fact, kind of stay away from my consumer credit reports. Now, if you started missing payments, not you personally, but you as in business owners, if you started missing payments on business credit cards that have a personal guarantee, it's a New York minute before they'll start slapping that stuff on your personal credit reports. So that, there is a way to avoid that from hitting a personal credit report. Number one is don't ever use your personal credit cards for business expenses. Number two, choose your business credit cards from issuers that do not report to the personal credit reporting agencies unless you do go into default.
Yeah. I've seen that many times consulting people during the repair process or just trying to learn how to better their credit. And it's pretty frequent when people are surprised, like, wait, this is a business credit card. How come it's on my personal credit report? I'm like, well, it wasn't until you stopped making payments on it. And then that's when, like you said, the game changes.
That's right.
Okay. All right. So John, we are coming up on 40 minutes. We're gonna call it a day and let everybody get to their holiday. John, thank you so much for joining me today and giving a great detailed explanation of credit cards and what to do, and a couple of suggestions on maybe what not to do and to keep an eye on during the holiday season when working through Black Friday and all the spending that we do. So everybody, thank you so much for joining us today, and we will see you on the Q&A live next Wednesday. Have a happy Thanksgiving. Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Thanks, David. You have a happy Thanksgiving too. See y'all later.